Chapter 5. Lyra burst through the throne room doors just as King Darius raised his hand to address the assembled court. The great hall fell silent, hundreds of eyes turning to stare at the disheveled Omega servant who had dared interrupt a royal proceeding. "Your Majesty," she gasped, clutching the stolen letters against her chest. "Prince Marcus, he's escaped. There's a conspiracy. Seize her." The command came from Lord Garrett, who had somehow arrived ahead of her and now stood among the nobles with blood on his sword. "She's a spy, working with the prince's enemies." Guards moved toward her, but Darius's voice cut through the confusion like a blade. "Stop." His amber eyes locked onto hers across the vast hall. "Let her speak." "Darius, you cannot seriously," Beta James began, but the king's raised hand silenced him. "I said let her speak." Lyra stumbled forward, her legs shaking from exhaustion and terror. Around her, she could see faces she recognized from Marcus's conspiracy, nobles who should have been imprisoned but instead stood free among the court. The trap was already closing. "The letters," she panted, holding up the documents. "Marcus has been corresponding with Alpha Cornelius. They planned everything, the poisoning, the coup, the elimination of all Omega servants. They're going to divide the kingdom between them." A murmur ran through the crowd, but it was quickly drowned out by Lord Vance's harsh laugh. "Convenient accusations from a proven seductress. How easily she weaves lies to protect her position." "These aren't lies." Lyra held the letters higher. "Marcus wrote them himself. He planned to massacre every Omega in the kingdom and blame it on foreign agents. Then Alpha Cornelius would invade, claiming to restore order." "Enough." Lord Garrett's voice boomed across the hall. "This Omega has already proven herself willing to manipulate and deceive. She poisoned the wine herself to gain favor, and now she fabricates evidence too." "The handwriting can be verified," Darius interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. He descended from his throne with predatory grace, moving toward Lyra. "Show me the letters." But before she could hand them over, the great doors burst open again. This time it was Marcus himself who entered, flanked by armed supporters and wearing a crown that had no right to rest on his head. "Hello, brother," he said with a cold smile. "I see you've been entertaining my accusers." The throne room erupted in chaos. Steel rang against steel as Marcus's supporters drew weapons, while loyal guards scrambled to defend their king. In the confusion, nobles screamed and fled for the exits, while others revealed their true allegiances by drawing hidden blades. "You're under arrest for treason," Darius snarled, his hand moving to his sword. "Am I? I think you'll find the situation rather reversed." Marcus gestured, and more armed men poured through the doors, too many to have been hiding in the castle. "Alpha Cornelius sends his regards. His forces are already crossing the border." Lyra found herself caught in the center of the melee, clutching the evidence that could prove Marcus's guilt even as weapons flashed around her. A guard fell beside her, blood pooling on the marble floor. Another stumbled past with a blade in his shoulder. She watched in horror as Darius fought his way toward his brother, his sword moving with lethal precision. But Marcus's supporters had numbers on their side, and they pressed forward with the desperate fury of men who knew failure meant death. "The Omega," she heard Marcus shout over the clash of steel. "Kill the Omega. She has the letters." Suddenly she was the target, blades turning in her direction as Marcus's men fought to reach her. She tried to run, but the press of bodies made movement impossible. A sword whistled past her ear, close enough to slice through her hair. Then Darius was there, appearing at her side like an avenging angel. His blade caught the descending sword meant for her heart, turning it aside with supernatural speed. "Stay behind me," he commanded, not taking his eyes off their attackers. "The letters," she began. "Keep them safe. We'll need them when this is over. If they survive that long." More of Marcus's supporters poured into the throne room, and Lyra could see the tide of battle turning against Darius's forces. Too many of the guards had been corrupted, too many of the nobles had chosen the winning side. She pressed the letters inside her bodice, praying they would survive whatever came next. Around her, the throne room had become a battlefield, ancient tapestries torn and bloodied, centuries of royal history trampled under desperate feet. Darius. Marcus's voice cut through the noise, mocking and cruel. Always the noble king, protecting his pets. But she's just an omega, brother. Weak, disposable, beneath your notice. Why die for something so worthless? Because she's worth more than a dozen of you, Darius replied, his sword never stopping its deadly dance. The words sent unexpected warmth through Lyra's chest, even as terror gripped her heart. He was fighting impossible odds, and she was nothing but a liability, a distraction that would get him killed. She saw the silver blade before he did. Lord Vance had circled behind them during the fight, moving with the stealth of a practiced assassin. His dagger was pure silver, forged specifically to kill wolves, its edge gleaming with deadly promise as he raised it toward Darius's unprotected back. Lyra didn't think. She didn't calculate odds or consider consequences. She simply moved, throwing herself between the blade and the man she loved with desperate, reckless courage. The silver bit deep, sliding between her ribs like ice and fire combined. Pain exploded through her chest, stealing her breath and bringing her to her knees. Distantly, she heard Darius roar with inhuman fury, heard the wet sound of steel finding flesh as he cut down her attacker. Lyra. His arms caught her as she fell, cradling her against his chest. No, no, no. Stay with me. She tried to speak, but blood filled her mouth. The silver burned in her chest like molten metal, sending waves of agony through her entire body. She could feel her strength bleeding away with the crimson that stained his shirt. Get the healers. Darius shouted, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. Someone get the healers. Already coming, Your Majesty. Beta James appeared at their side, his own sword bloody. We've driven them back, but Marcus escaped in the confusion. Lyra tried to focus on their faces, but the world was growing dim around the edges. She could smell Darius's scent more strongly now, pine and winter storms and something wild that called to her very soul. It was comforting, like being wrapped in warmth and safety even as the cold of approaching death crept through her bones. Don't you dare, Darius whispered, his voice breaking. Don't you dare leave me now. She wanted to tell him it wasn't her choice, that the silver was doing its work regardless of her will. Wanted to say she was sorry for causing this mess, for bringing chaos to his ordered world. But the words wouldn't come, lost in the taste of copper and the growing darkness behind her eyes. That's when she felt it, a sudden, electric connection that snapped into place like lightning finding ground. The bond was so intense, so overwhelming, that for a moment it burned away even the silver's poison. She could feel Darius's emotions as if they were her own, terror, rage, desperate love, and underneath it all, a recognition so profound it shook them both to their cores. Mate. The word echoed in her mind, carrying the weight of destiny and the promise of forever. My mate. You feel it too, Darius breathed, wonder mixing with horror in his voice. The bond. You're my fated mate. She managed a tiny nod, using the last of her strength to lift her hand to his face. His skin was warm beneath her palm, solid and real in a world that was rapidly fading away. I can't lose you, he said, his voice raw with emotion. Not now. Not when I've just found you. The silver's poison was spreading, she could feel it racing through her bloodstream like ice water. Soon it would reach her heart, and then. She tried to memorize his face, the gold flecks in his amber eyes, the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. Darius, she whispered, the word barely audible. I'm sorry. No. His grip on her tightened, desperate and fierce. You don't get to apologize for saving my life. You don't get to be sorry for being exactly who you are. She could feel him making a decision, could sense the moment when desperation overcame protocol and royal propriety. His eyes began to glow with an inner light, his canines extending as his wolf rose to the surface. I won't let you die, he said, and there was something primal in his voice now, something that spoke of ancient powers and bonds that transcended human understanding. If you'll let me, I can share my strength with you. I can try to save you. A mating bite. That's what he was offering, the most intimate bond possible between wolves, one that would link their very souls together for eternity. It was unprecedented for an alpha to mark an omega, especially publicly, especially when that omega was a servant. It would cause scandal beyond imagining. Would shake the very foundations of their society's rigid hierarchy. Would give Marcus and his supporters ammunition for years to come. But it might save her life. Yes, she breathed, putting all her trust in the man who had seen her worth when no one else would. Please. Darius's bite was gentle despite the urgency, his teeth finding the sweet spot where her neck met her shoulder. The moment his canines pierced her skin, power flooded through her, raw, wild, overwhelming strength that burned away the silver's poison like sunlight driving back shadows. She arched against him as the mate bond fully formed, crying out as their souls intertwined in ways she'd never imagined possible. She could feel his wolf recognizing hers, could sense the completion of something that had been broken all her life without her knowing it. The silver wound began to heal, new flesh knitting together with supernatural speed. Her strength returned in a rush, along with senses so sharp they were almost painful. She could hear heartbeats throughout the castle, could smell individual scents from dozens of people, could feel the pulse of life in everything around her. When she finally opened her eyes, the world looked different. Colors were more vivid, details sharper, and underlying everything was the constant, comforting presence of her mate's consciousness touching hers. Lyra? Darius's voice was uncertain, hopeful, terrified. She sat up slowly, marveling at the easy strength in her limbs. The wound was gone, leaving only a thin silver scar and the healing mark of his bite. But there was something else, something that made the watching courtiers gasp in shock and fear. Her eyes, she realized, were no longer the soft brown of an omega. They now held flecks of gold, echoes of Darius's own amber gaze. The change marked her as something new, something unprecedented in their world's long history. An omega bearing an alpha's mark, Beta James whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror. It's impossible. Apparently not, Darius replied, helping her to her feet. His arms stayed around her waist, protective and possessive. Though I suspect the court will have opinions about it. Around them, the surviving nobles stared in stunned silence. Some looked curious, others appalled, but all wore expressions of people witnessing something that would reshape their understanding of the world. Your Majesty, one of the older lords spoke up, his voice carefully neutral. Perhaps we should discuss the implications of this development in private. The only implication that matters is that my mate is alive, Darius replied firmly. Everything else is secondary. But Lyra could see the concern in his eyes, could feel through their new bond the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. By marking her, he'd protected her life but potentially endangered his throne. The kingdom was already in chaos from Marcus's coup attempt, adding a scandal of this magnitude might be more than it could bear. The letters, she said suddenly, remembering the evidence still tucked against her heart. Marcus's correspondence with Alpha Cornelius. We have proof of the conspiracy. She pulled the documents from her bodice, relieved to find them largely undamaged despite the violence. Darius took them with careful hands, his expression growing grimmer as he read. Beta James, send riders to intercept Alpha Cornelius's forces at the border. These letters provide more than enough justification for treating his advance as an invasion. He looked up at the assembled court, his voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. As for Prince Marcus, a bounty of 1,000 gold pieces for his capture, alive. He will answer for his crimes. And the Omega? Lord Garrett asked, somehow having survived the battle despite his treachery. What becomes of the marked one? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Lyra could feel the court's attention focusing on her, could sense the mix of fear, curiosity, and calculation in their stares. She was something new, something that didn't fit into their carefully ordered world. She becomes exactly what she's always been, Darius said, his arm tightening around her. Someone under my protection. Someone whose worth has been proven beyond question. Someone who saved not just my life, but potentially the entire kingdom. But the precedent, another lord began. The precedent is that loyalty and courage matter more than bloodline or birth rank. Darius cut him off. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to take it up with me personally. The threat was clear, and no one seemed eager to challenge an alpha king who had just survived a coup attempt and gained a mate in the same day. But Lyra could feel the undercurrents of discontent, the whispered conversations that would start the moment they left the throne room. "Your Majesty," she said quietly, speaking through their new mental link rather than aloud. "This is going to cause problems." "Let it," he replied the same way, his mental voice warm with affection and determination. "You're worth whatever problems come." As they stood together in the blood-stained throne room, surrounded by the wreckage of Marcus's failed coup, Lyra felt the weight of her new reality settling around her. She was no longer a servant, no longer powerless, no longer alone. But she was also no longer safe, no longer invisible, no longer able to hide from the dangerous currents of royal politics. The kingdom was in uproar, Marcus was still free and planning revenge, and she bore a mark that challenged everything their society believed about hierarchy and power. But when Darius looked at her with eyes full of love and pride, when she felt the steady warmth of their mate bond pulsing between them, she found she didn't care about the challenges ahead. She had found her place in the world, and she would fight to keep it. Chapter 6. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Lyra's new chambers in the east wing, casting golden light across furniture far grander than anything she'd ever imagined owning. Persian rugs covered polished marble floors, silk drapes framed diamond-paned windows, and an ornate four-poster bed dominated the center of the room, a bed she'd barely slept in for 3 nights running. She stood before a full-length mirror, studying the reflection that no longer seemed quite her own. The changes were subtle but undeniable. Her brown hair now held threads of russet that caught the light like flame, her skin seemed to glow with inner vitality, and her eyes held flecks of molten gold that shifted and danced when her emotions ran high. The bite mark on her throat had healed to a delicate silver scar, but it pulsed with warmth whenever Darius was near, which had been almost constantly since the coup attempt. She touched the mark gently, feeling the immediate response through their bond, his presence in the castle below, his concern for her well-being, his fierce protectiveness that sometimes felt more like a cage than comfort. A sharp knock interrupted her brooding. "Enter," she called, not turning from the mirror. "My lady." The young beta servant who entered kept her eyes carefully downcast. "His Majesty requests your presence in the throne room. There are visitors." The hesitation in the girl's voice made Lyra's stomach clench with foreboding. "What kind of visitors?" "Representatives from the Council of Alphas, my lady. They've come about your situation." "Your situation." As if she were a problem to be solved rather than a person. Lyra sighed, reaching for the elegant blue dress that had been provided for her, clothing befitting her new station as the king's. What exactly was she now? Not quite queen, certainly not still a servant, but something altogether unprecedented. "Tell His Majesty I'll be down shortly," she said, dismissing the servant with a nod. 20 minutes later, she stood at the threshold of the throne room, her enhanced hearing picking up the voices within before she entered. There were at least a dozen alphas present, their sense mixing into a complex tapestry of power, aggression, and barely contained hostility. "Cannot be allowed to stand," a harsh voice was saying. "The natural order exists for a reason, Your Majesty. When we begin blurring the lines between ranks, we invite chaos." "Alpha Cornelius makes a valid point," another voice added, smoother, more diplomatic, but no less dangerous. "This anomaly could destabilize the entire werewolf hierarchy. Other Omegas might begin to think they can aspire beyond their station." Lyra's jaw tightened. Anomaly. Another charming description to add to her growing collection. She pushed open the doors and entered with as much dignity as she could muster. The conversation died immediately, every eye in the room turning to study her with expressions ranging from curiosity to revulsion. At the center of it all sat Darius on his throne, his amber eyes finding hers immediately through their bond. "You don't have to be here for this," his mental voice whispered across their connection. "Yes, I do," she replied silently. "They're talking about me. I deserve to hear what they're saying." Alpha Cornelius stood near the front of the assembled group, his pale blue eyes cold with disdain. Beside him stood several other alphas she didn't recognize, but their body language spoke of alliance and shared purpose. "Ah, the marked Omega joins us," Cornelius said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "How illuminating to see the result of this unfortunate experiment in person." "Careful, Cornelius," Darius warned, his voice low and dangerous. "You're speaking about my mate." "Your mate, perhaps, but what exactly is she now?" This came from a silver-haired alpha Lyra recognized as Theron Blackthorn, ruler of the Northern Territories. The bond has changed her beyond recognition. She's neither Omega nor Alpha, but something else entirely. Something unnatural. Lyra felt heat rise in her chest, not embarrassment, but anger that seemed to burn hotter and brighter than anything she'd experienced before her transformation. "I'm standing right here," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the vast hall. "If you have questions about my nature, perhaps you should address them to me directly." Several of the alphas looked shocked that she'd spoken at all. In their world, Omegas, even marked ones, were expected to defer to Alpha authority in all things. "You see?" Cornelius gestured toward her as if she'd proven his point. "Already she displays the arrogance typical of her kind when given even the smallest amount of power. This is precisely why the old ways existed, to maintain proper balance and hierarchy." "The old ways," Lyra repeated, something in his phrasing catching her attention. "You speak as if Omega-Alpha bonds were once common practice." A flicker of something, annoyance? Fear, crossed Cornelius's face before his expression smoothed back to diplomatic neutrality. "Ancient history has little bearing on current reality, girl. Doesn't it?" Lyra stepped further into the room, ignoring the way several alphas shifted nervously. "If such bonds existed before, then perhaps my situation isn't as unprecedented as everyone claims." "Enough speculation," Theron interjected sharply. "The fact remains that you represent a threat to everything our society is built upon. The Council has discussed this matter extensively, and we've reached a unanimous decision." Darius rose from his throne, his movement fluid and threatening. "Have you indeed? How presumptuous of you to reach decisions about matters that fall under my sovereignty." "Your sovereignty extends only as far as your ability to maintain order," Cornelius replied coolly. "And this aberration threatens that order. Therefore, we demand her immediate execution." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face even as rage exploded through her bond with Darius. His power filled the air, making it thick and hard to breathe. "You demand nothing in my kingdom," he snarled, his wolf bleeding through his human form. "And you certainly don't demand the death of my mate. Then you choose her over the stability of the realm?" Theron asked. "Over the alliances that keep your borders secure? Over the very foundations of werewolf society?" "I choose truth over fear," Darius replied. "I choose growth over stagnation. And I choose to protect those who have proven their worth through actions rather than bloodline." "Noble words," Cornelius said with a cold smile. "But words won't save you when the other kingdoms refuse to recognize your authority. When trade agreements are cancelled, when borders are closed, when you find yourself isolated and alone because you chose to harbor an abomination." The word hit Lyra like a slap. She'd been called many things in the past few days, but abomination carried a weight of condemnation that made her soul ache. She felt Darius's fury spike through their bond, felt him preparing to unleash his power on anyone who dared insult her further. But before he could act, she stepped forward. "I am not an abomination," she said, her voice steady despite the pain in her chest. "I am a person who was willing to die to save the man I love. The bond we share came from that sacrifice, from that choice. If that makes me something to be feared, then perhaps your society is built on foundations that deserve to crumble." Brave words from someone who exists only through the unnatural perversion of ancient laws, Cornelius sneered. "But bravery won't change what you are, a corruption of the natural order that threatens everything pure in our world." Something inside Lyra snapped. The anger she'd been holding back for days, the frustration of being discussed like an object, the pain of being called an abomination, it all came together in a surge of power unlike anything she'd ever experienced. The air around her began to shimmer with heat. Every wolf in the room instinctively stepped back as dominance rolled off her in waves, not the seductive pull of Omega allure, but something far more dangerous, the commanding presence of an alpha combined with the fierce protectiveness of an Omega defending her territory. "Enough," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that made the ancient windows vibrate in their frames. "I am tired of being discussed like a political problem. I am tired of being called names by men who don't understand the first thing about what I've become. And I am especially tired of threats against my life being treated as reasonable diplomatic positions." The assembled alphas stared at her in shock, several of them actually backing toward the doors. This was not Omega behavior, not even modified Omega behavior. This was something entirely new, something that challenged every assumption they'd built their lives upon. "You want to know what I am?" Lyra continued, her power filling the room like a living thing. "I am someone who will no longer accept that my worth is determined by an accident of birth. I am someone who will not bow to authority that exists solely to preserve the comfort of those who benefit from inequality. And I am someone who will fight to protect others who have been deemed lesser by a system that serves only itself." A crystal goblet on a nearby table suddenly cracked, then shattered entirely. The scent of ozone filled the air, and Lyra realized with shock that electricity was literally crackling around her fingertips. "What is happening to me?" Through their bond, she felt Darius's amazement mixing with concern. He'd never seen anything like this either. The raw power she was unconsciously wielding went beyond anything in their known experience of werewolf abilities. "Impossible," Theron breathed. "No Omega possesses that kind of dominance. No Alpha commands electricity. What has she become?" Before anyone could answer, the throne room doors burst open. Beta James rushed in, his face grim with urgent news. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but there's been a development. We've received word from the border. Prince Marcus has been spotted with a large force moving toward the capital. But that's not the most disturbing news." "What else?" Darius demanded, his attention torn between the immediate threat and the woman whose power was still making the air vibrate with energy. "He's carrying ancient texts, Your Majesty. Documents that he claims prove the marked Omega's existence was prophesied long ago. He's declaring himself the rightful king and her the harbinger of the old way's return." The news sent shock waves through the assembled alphas. Several of them began talking at once, their voices rising in panic and confusion. "The old prophecies were destroyed centuries ago," Cornelius protested. "They were nothing but superstition and dangerous ideology." "Were they?" Lyra asked, finally getting her power under control. The electricity faded, but the sense of barely contained force remained. Or were they destroyed because they threatened those who benefited from the current hierarchy? She turned to address the full assembly. "You all speak of the natural order as if it's been unchanged since the beginning of time. But what if it hasn't? What if Omega-Alpha bonds were common once, before being systematically eliminated? What if everything you've built your power on is a lie?" "Preposterous," Theron snapped, but she could smell the fear under his bluster. "Is it? Beta James, what exactly do these texts claim?" The Beta looked uncomfortable being put on the spot, but his loyalty to the truth won out. "According to our initial reports, they describe Omega-Alpha bonds as the foundation of early werewolf society. They suggest such pairs were considered blessed, not cursed. And they indicate that the current hierarchy was artificially imposed." "By whom?" Darius asked, his voice deadly quiet. "The texts aren't clear on that point, Your Majesty. But they do mention a council of pure-blood alphas who believed Omega-Alpha bonds threatened their control over territory and resources. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If the texts were authentic, then everything the current Alpha leadership had told their people about the natural order was a fabrication designed to maintain their power." "Convenient timing for such revelations," Cornelius said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Ancient texts appearing just when this anomaly needs justification for her existence." "The timing is interesting," Lyra agreed, her mind racing through possibilities. "Almost as if someone has been sitting on this information, waiting for the right moment to reveal it." She looked around the room, studying faces, noting reactions. Most of the alphas seemed genuinely shocked by the news, but a few looked more worried than surprised. Who else knew about these texts? She asked Beta James. I'm not sure, my lady. The intelligence came through several channels. But given their age and rarity, anyone with access would have to be someone with significant resources and historical knowledge. Lyra's enhanced senses picked up something then, a spike of anxiety from somewhere in the room, accompanied by the bitter scent of guilt and fear. She turned slowly, following the trail until her eyes met those of Alpha Cornelius. You knew, she said, her voice carrying certainty. You've known about the texts all along. Ridiculous accusations from a desperate. You've known that Omega-Alpha bonds were once common, she continued, her new abilities allowing her to read his micro-expressions, his scent, the very rhythm of his heartbeat. You've known that the current hierarchy was artificially created. And you've been working to ensure that knowledge never came to light. Even if such texts existed, Cornelius replied carefully, they would represent nothing more than ancient mythology. Stories told by primitive peoples who didn't understand the realities of power and governance. Stories told by people who lived in a society where worth wasn't determined by rank, Lyra corrected. Where Omegas and Alphas worked together as equals rather than in a system designed to benefit a chosen few. She stepped closer to him, her power rising again despite her efforts to control it. How long have you known, Cornelius? How long have you and others like you been hiding the truth about werewolf history? You're seeing conspiracies where none exist, he said, but sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Am I? Or have you been so invested in maintaining your privilege that you'll do anything to prevent others from learning they don't have to accept their place in your carefully constructed hierarchy? The accusation hit home, she could see it in his eyes, smell it in his scent. Around them, the other alphas were beginning to look at Cornelius with new suspicion, pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. The systematic elimination of Omega-Alpha bonds, Lyra continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. The creation of a society that teaches Omegas to be submissive and Alphas to be dominant. The destruction of any evidence that things were once different. How long has this been going on, and how many of you are part of it? Before Cornelius could answer, Darius moved to stand beside her, his presence both protective and supportive. It seems we have much more to discuss than anyone anticipated, he said, his voice carrying royal authority. Beta James, I want those texts examined by our most trusted scholars. I want to know everything, their age, their authenticity, their contents. Already arranged, Your Majesty. Good. As for the Council's demands regarding my mate. Darius looked around the room, his amber eyes burning with determination. They are rejected. Completely and finally. Anyone who wishes to challenge that decision is welcome to face me in single combat. The offer hung in the air like a blade. No one seemed eager to take him up on it. This isn't over, Cornelius said finally, his diplomatic mask slipping to reveal the hatred beneath. The other kingdoms will hear of this. They'll know that you've chosen chaos over order, perversion over purity. When they come for you, and they will come, don't expect mercy. I don't expect mercy, Darius replied coolly. I expect truth. And I expect those who have built their power on lies to answer for their crimes. As the Alphas filed out of the throne room, muttering among themselves, Lyra felt the weight of what had just occurred settling around her like a heavy cloak. She'd challenged the very foundations of their society, had accused respected leaders of centuries-long deception, had revealed powers that no one understood. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a terrible thought was forming. If Cornelius and others like him had been hiding the truth about werewolf history for so long, what else had they been lying about? And how far would they go to prevent that truth from destroying the world they'd built? We need to talk, Darius's mental voice whispered across their bond. Yes, she agreed. We do. But as they stood together in the empty throne room, surrounded by the echoes of accusations and threats, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing at the edge of something vast and dangerous. A truth that would either save them all or destroy everything they'd ever known. Chapter 7. The private library in the East Wing had become Lyra's sanctuary over the past 2 days. Ancient tomes lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their leather bindings worn smooth by countless hands, their pages yellow with age and wisdom. She sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, surrounded by open books and scrolls, her enhanced abilities allowing her to read faster than she'd ever thought possible. In the time before the Great Sundering, when moon and stars sang in harmony, the Omega-born and Alpha-born ruled as one. The blessed pairs were the foundation upon which all packs built their strength, for in their union lay the balance of power and wisdom, force and compassion, dominance and nurture. The words seemed to burn themselves into her memory. Every text she found corroborated the same truth: Omega-Alpha bonds hadn't been rare aberrations, but the cornerstone of ancient werewolf society. And according to several sources, these bonded pairs had possessed abilities that went far beyond anything seen in modern werewolves. Still reading, my dear? Lyra looked up to find Elena Whiteheart standing in the doorway, carrying a silver tea service. The elderly court advisor had been nothing but kind since Lyra's transformation, checking on her welfare, bringing her meals when she forgot to eat, offering gentle guidance on navigating her new position. Elena, you didn't need to bring tea, Lyra said, closing the book she'd been reading. I could have called for a servant. Nonsense. You've been working so hard to understand your new situation. The least I can do is ensure you're properly cared for. Elena set the tea service on a small table and began pouring, her movements graceful despite her apparent age. What have you discovered in your research? Lyra gestured to the books surrounding her. More than I ever imagined. Elena, did you know that Omega-Alpha bonds were once considered sacred? That pairs like Darius and me weren't just common, but were actually the ruling class? Ancient history can be fascinating, Elena replied, handing her a delicate porcelain cup. Though one must be careful not to put too much faith in old stories. Time has a way of embellishing truth. Something in the older woman's tone made Lyra pause, cup halfway to her lips. These aren't stories. They're historical records, some of them dating back over 1,000 years. They're consistent across multiple sources. Are they? Elena settled into a chair across from her, her pale blue eyes studying Lyra with an intensity that seemed at odds with her grandmotherly appearance. And what do these historical records tell you about why such bonds disappeared? Lyra set down her cup without drinking, her enhanced senses picking up something wrong with Elena's scent, a bitter undertone she'd never noticed before. They mention a purge. A systematic campaign to eliminate Omega-Alpha pairs and restructure werewolf society around pure alpha dominance. Ah yes, the Great Sundering. Elena's voice carried a note of something that might have been nostalgia. Such a dramatic name for what was actually a necessary correction. The words hit Lyra like ice water. Correction? You must understand, my dear, the old ways were chaotic. When Omegas possessed real power, when they could stand as equals to Alphas, it created instability. Wars between competing blessed pairs, territories constantly shifting, no clear hierarchy to maintain order. Elena rose from her chair, moving to the window that overlooked the castle grounds. The purge wasn't cruelty, it was evolution. The survival of the fittest applied to social structure. Lyra felt her newly awakened power stirring beneath her skin, responding to the growing dread in her chest. You speak as if you were there. Don't I? Elena turned back to face her, and for the first time, Lyra really looked at the woman who had been serving the crown for longer than anyone could remember. The face was lined with age, yes, but the eyes held depths that spoke of centuries, not decades. Tell me, child, what do you know about life extension magic? The question confirmed what Lyra's instincts had already whispered. You're not human, are you? Not entirely. I'm werewolf, just as you are. But I'm also something more, a survivor of the old world, tasked with ensuring the new world remains stable. Elena's appearance began to shift subtly, her stooped posture straightening, her wrinkled features smoothing into something that was still aged but far more formidable. I was there when the first blessed pair was executed. I helped plan the campaigns that drove the Omega bloodlines into hiding. I wrote the new laws that relegated your kind to servitude. Horror flooded through Lyra as the full implications hit her. You orchestrated the genocide of your own people. I saved our people, Elena corrected sharply. The Omega-Alpha bonds were creating mutations, aberrations that threatened the very fabric of werewolf nature. Powers like the ones you've been displaying, electricity, dominance that transcends rank, abilities that blur the lines between natural and supernatural. Do you think such things came without cost? Lyra's cup shattered in her grip as her power spiked. What cost? Madness. Corruption. The slow transformation of werewolves into something no longer truly wolf. Elena moved closer, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper. The strongest of the ancient pairs began to lose their humanity entirely, becoming creatures of pure power with no connection to pack, family, or natural law. They had to be stopped. And who decided that? Lyra demanded, rising to her feet. Who gave you the right to determine the fate of an entire bloodline? History did, Elena replied calmly. Survival did. The choice between controlled evolution and chaotic destruction. She gestured to the books scattered around the room. Those texts you've been reading so devotedly. They were written by the survivors, the ones who escaped the purge. Of course they paint the old ways in golden light. They were written by the defeated, trying to justify their own extinction. The casual cruelty in Elena's words sent rage coursing through Lyra's veins. You're talking about people. About families, children, entire communities that were destroyed because they didn't fit your vision of order. I'm talking about the greater good, Elena countered. About the stability that has kept our people safe for centuries. About the natural hierarchy that prevents the chaos you're already beginning to create. What chaos? Look around you, child. In less than a week, you've destabilized political alliances, challenged the authority of the Alpha Council, and begun displaying powers that could tear apart the very foundations of our society. Elena's eyes glittered with something that might have been pity. You're proving everything the purge was designed to prevent. Lyra felt the truth hitting her like physical blows. This has all been planned, hasn't it? Everything that's happened, Marcus's coup, my transformation, even the discovery of these texts. You've been orchestrating all of it. Not orchestrating, Elena corrected. Guiding. Ensuring that when the old bloodlines finally resurfaced, as we always knew they would, they could be dealt with permanently. She moved to another bookshelf, pulling out a slim volume bound in black leather. Marcus has been a useful tool, I'll admit. His genuine hatred of Omegas made him easy to manipulate. But he was never the real threat. I was. You are, Elena agreed, opening the black book. Do you know what this is? Lyra's enhanced senses recoiled from the volume as if it carried some fundamental wrongness. I don't want to know. It's a genealogical record. The true bloodlines of every Omega family that survived the purge. Elena's finger traced down a page until it stopped at a particular entry. Here. Lyra Thorne, daughter of Maria Thorne, granddaughter of Sage Thorne. Your grandmother wasn't just a healer, my dear. She was the last known descendant of the moonborn bloodline, the most powerful Omega family in the old world. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the library. Lyra felt something shifting deep inside her, as if pieces of her identity were rearranging themselves into new patterns. The moonborn were the original rulers, Elena continued relentlessly. They were the first Omega line to bond with Alphas, creating the template that all other blessed pairs followed. Their bloodline carried the purest expression of Omega power, healing, empathy, the ability to balance and channel Alpha strength. They were also the most dangerous when corrupted. My grandmother was not corrupted, Lyra said fiercely. She spent her life helping people. Your grandmother spent her life hiding what she was, using only the weakest expressions of her power to avoid detection. She knew that if the truth came out, if anyone realized the moonborn line had survived, the consequences would be catastrophic. Elena closed the book with a soft snap. She raised your mother in ignorance, hoping to dilute the bloodline through breeding with ordinary wolves. When that failed, she did the same with you. Failed? The moonborn power doesn't dilute, child. It accumulates. 3 generations of suppressed ability, all waiting for the right catalyst to awaken it. Elena's smile was cold as winter. A mate bond with an alpha king was certainly catalyst enough. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. You've been watching my family for generations. Watching. Waiting. Preparing for the day when the bloodline would finally reveal itself. Elena moved to a cabinet and withdrew a crystal vial filled with dark liquid. Do you know what fascinates me most about your transformation? It's not just the power you've gained. It's how perfectly it's played out according to the old prophecies. What prophecies? The ones that spoke of the last moonborn rising in a time of great upheaval, marked by an alpha king's bite, wielding power that would either restore the old ways or destroy them entirely. Elena held up the vial, its contents seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Prophecies that I've spent centuries ensuring would never come to pass. Horror crept up Lyra's spine as she realized what Elena was holding. What is that? Insurance, Elena replied. A toxin derived from the essence of severed mate bonds. Quite rare, quite potent, and quite specific in its effects. Before Lyra could react, the library doors burst open. Darius strode in, his face tight with concern and urgency. Lyra, we need to. He stopped short, taking in the scene before him, Elena standing with the vial, Lyra surrounded by scattered books, the tension thick enough to cut with a blade. What's going on here? Perfect timing, Elena murmured, then moved with speed that belied her apparent age. The vial shattered against the floor at Darius's feet, its dark contents splashing across his boots and up his legs. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Darius staggered, his face going pale as the toxin soaked through his clothes and into his skin. Through their mate bond, Lyra felt his pain like a physical blow, a burning, tearing sensation as if something was trying to rip their connection apart from the inside. Darius. She lunged toward him, but Elena stepped between them. Don't touch him, the older woman warned. Contact will only spread the toxin to you as well. What did you do to him? Lyra demanded, her power exploding outward in waves of barely controlled energy. I gave him a choice, Elena replied calmly, even as books began flying off shelves around them. The toxin is specifically designed to attack mate bonds. It will kill him slowly, painfully, unless the bond is severed completely. You're insane. I'm practical. His death will serve no purpose except to make you suffer, which while satisfying, doesn't solve the larger problem. Elena pulled another vial from her robes, this one filled with clear liquid. This is the antidote. It will save his life and sever your bonds simultaneously. All you have to do is drink it. The trap was perfect in its cruelty. Save Darius by destroying the connection between them, or watch him die in agony while their bond remained intact. The bond's severance will kill me, Lyra realized. Eventually, yes. But your death will end the moonborn line permanently, ensure that the old powers never rise again, and maintain the stability that our people have enjoyed for centuries. Elena's expression was almost gentle. It's a fair trade, one life to protect millions. Through their rapidly weakening bond, Lyra felt Darius trying to speak, trying to tell her not to sacrifice herself. But the toxin was working too quickly, stealing his strength and voice with each passing moment. There has to be another way, Lyra said desperately. There is, a new voice said from the doorway. But you're not going to like it. They turned to find Marcus standing in the entrance, flanked by armed warriors wearing the traditional leathers of the old packs. His crown sat crooked on his head, and his clothes were travel-stained, but his amber eyes burned with fanatic fervor. Brother mine, he said, taking in Darius's condition with satisfaction. Elena said you might need rescuing from your unfortunate attachment. You're working together, Lyra breathed. We've always been working together, Elena confirmed. Marcus has been my agent for years, carefully positioned to act when the time came. His coup attempt was never meant to succeed, it was meant to force your transformation, to bring your true nature into the open where it could be properly dealt with. The army outside believes they're here to restore traditional values, Marcus added, moving into the room. To eliminate the aberration that threatens our way of life. They'll follow my orders without question, especially when those orders involve protecting pack purity. How many? Darius managed to gasp, forcing the words through pain that Lyra could feel echoing in her own chest. Enough, Marcus replied. Representatives from every traditional pack, united in their desire to see the natural order restored. They believe the marked Omega has bewitched their rightful king, that killing her will free you from unnatural influence. They don't know the truth, Lyra realized. About Elena, about the real history, about what was really destroyed during the purge. They know what they need to know, Elena said firmly. That you represent chaos, that your existence threatens everything they hold dear, and that your death will restore balance to the werewolf world. Outside, Lyra could hear the sounds of an army taking position, hundreds of warriors, maybe thousands, all convinced that she was an enemy to be destroyed. Through the windows, she could see torches being lit as the afternoon sun began to fade. The antidote, Elena said, holding up the clear veil again. Save your mate's life and end this peacefully. Or watch him die while my army tears this castle apart stone by stone. Darius collapsed to his knees, the toxin ravaging his system with increasing speed. Through their bond, Lyra felt his strength ebbing, felt the connection between them stretching toward the breaking point. The choice was impossible, but it was also inevitable. She'd spent her entire life being powerless, accepting whatever fate others decided for her. But now, looking at the woman who had orchestrated centuries of genocide and the man who had betrayed his own blood for power, she felt something crystallizing inside her. She was the last of the moonborn bloodline. The final descendant of werewolves who had once ruled as equals, who had possessed powers that could reshape the world itself. And she was done being anyone's victim. You're right about one thing, she said, her voice growing stronger even as electricity began to crackle around her hands. My existence does threaten your way of life. Because your way of life is built on lies, oppression, and the systematic murder of anyone who might challenge your authority. Child, you cannot possibly think to fight an entire army. I'm not a child, Lyra interrupted, her power rising to levels that made the very air shimmer. I'm the last moonborn. The heir to powers you've spent centuries trying to destroy. And I'm done pretending to be less than what I am. Elena's face went pale as she finally recognized the true threat standing before her. Marcus, stop her. But as Marcus moved toward her, drawing his sword, Lyra felt the full weight of her heritage settling around her like a mantle of stars. She was more than just a marked Omega. She was the living embodiment of everything the Purge had tried to eliminate. And she was about to show them exactly what that meant. Chapter 8. The power coursing through Lyra's veins felt like liquid starlight, wild and ancient and utterly her own. She could feel centuries of suppressed moonborn heritage awakening, responding to her desperate need and iron-strong will. Around her, books flew through the air as electricity crackled from her fingertips, but her focus remained laser-sharp on the impossible choice before her. Darius knelt on the library floor, his face gray with pain as Elena's toxin worked to sever their mate bond from the inside out. Through their connection, she felt his life force ebbing with each labored breath. His amber eyes found hers across the chaos, and in them she saw not a demand for sacrifice, but understanding. Whatever choice she made, he would accept. That understanding, that respect for her autonomy even in the face of death, crystallized something fundamental inside her. You're right, she told Elena, her voice carrying harmonics that made the ancient windows vibrate. I do have to choose. Elena smiled coldly, holding the antidote aloft. Finally, some sense. Drink this, sever the bond, and save his life. Your death will ensure. I choose neither, Lyra interrupted, her power rising to levels that made the very air shimmer with heat. I won't let him die, and I won't sacrifice myself to save him. Instead, I'm going to do something you never considered possible. And what's that? I'm going to heal him myself. Elena's face went pale. That's impossible. The toxin specifically targets mate bonds. Only complete severance can. Only complete severance can neutralize a toxin designed by someone who spent centuries studying Omega-Alpha bonds, Lyra corrected, taking a step toward Darius despite Marcus's threatening advance. But you never encountered a fully awakened moonborn bloodline, did you? She dropped to her knees beside Darius, ignoring Marcus's sword at her back and Elena's furious protests. Through their bond, she felt his confusion and desperate hope as her hands settled on his chest. The moonborn weren't just powerful omegas, she continued, her voice growing stronger as ancient knowledge flooded her consciousness. They were healers on a level your modern world has forgotten. They could reach into the very essence of what makes us wolf and reshape it from within. Her hands began to glow with soft silver light, the same color as moonbeams on water. Darius gasped as her power flowed into him, not fighting the toxin directly but instead reinforcing their bond, strengthening it beyond Elena's ability to sever. Impossible, Elena breathed, but there was fear in her voice now. You destroyed the knowledge but not the bloodline, Lyra said, pouring everything she had into the healing. You eliminated the teachers but not the potential. And you never understood that true Omega power doesn't come from dominance or submission, it comes from choice. The toxin began to break down under the combined force of their strengthened bond and her healing abilities. She felt Darius's pain receding, felt color returning to his face as his wolf reasserted itself. But the effort was costing her. Blood trickled from her nose as she pushed her newly awakened abilities to their absolute limit. Lyra, stop, Darius whispered, his voice stronger now. You're burning yourself out. I can handle it, she gritted out, though spots danced in her vision. Not alone, you can't. His hands covered hers, and suddenly she felt his strength joining with hers, their bond allowing them to share not just emotions but actual power. We do this together. The difference was immediate and profound. Where her Omega abilities excelled at healing and nurturing, his alpha strength provided the raw force needed to completely obliterate Elena's poison. Together, they created something neither could achieve alone, a perfect synthesis of complementary powers. Elena's scream of rage filled the library as her carefully crafted toxin dissolved entirely, leaving Darius not just healed but stronger than before. You stupid children, she snarled, her ancient composure finally cracking. You have no idea what you've unleashed. The power you're wielding will corrupt you just as it corrupted the ancients. You'll become monsters, and I'll be there to watch your kingdom burn. The only monster here is you, Lyra replied, rising to her feet with fluid grace. You committed genocide to preserve your vision of order. You manipulated innocent people into centuries of oppression. And you were willing to murder your own king to maintain control. I did what was necessary. You did what was convenient. Lyra's power flared, sending books flying and making the very stones of the castle tremble. But that ends now. Marcus chose that moment to strike, his silver sword whistling through the air toward her unprotected back. But Lyra was no longer the frightened servant who had stumbled into the wrong bed. She was the last moonborn, heir to powers that had once shaped the werewolf world. She spun with inhuman speed, catching the blade in her bare hand. The silver burned, but her healing abilities were already working to repair the damage faster than it could accumulate. Impossible, Marcus breathed, staring at his sword trapped in her grip. That seems to be everyone's favorite word today, she observed, then sent a pulse of power through the blade that shattered it into 1,000 pieces. Let me teach you a new one, consequences. She gestured, and Marcus flew backward as if struck by an invisible fist, slamming into the stone wall hard enough to crack the ancient masonry. He slumped to the floor, unconscious but alive. You always were too gentle, Elena sneered, pulling a wicked curved dagger from her robes. Mercy will be your downfall, just as it was for the original moonborn. Mercy isn't weakness, Lyra replied, her power continuing to build around her like a gathering storm. It's choice. The choice to preserve life even when death would be easier. The choice to build rather than destroy. The choice to forgive even when forgiveness isn't deserved. Pretty words. Let's see how they sound when you're bleeding out on my blade. Elena moved with the speed and grace of someone who had survived centuries of conflict, her dagger seeking Lyra's heart with lethal precision. But she had miscalculated, Lyra was no longer fighting alone. Darius intercepted the strike, his own sword appearing in his hand as if summoned from the air itself. The clash of steel on steel rang through the library as he engaged Elena in deadly combat, his movements enhanced by the power flowing through their bond. But Elena was ancient and cunning, and she had spent centuries perfecting the art of killing wolves with special abilities. Her blade wove patterns in the air that seemed to cut through more than just flesh. They targeted the very bonds that held werewolf nature together. "You cannot protect her forever," Elena taunted as she fought. "The army outside grows restless. They came here to kill the aberration, and they won't leave until the job is done." "Then they'll be disappointed," Lyra said, stepping forward to join the battle. Fighting alongside Darius felt as natural as breathing. Their bond allowed them to anticipate each other's moves, to coordinate attacks with supernatural precision. Where he provided strength and speed, she offered healing and support, mending his wounds before they could slow him down. But Elena was right about one thing: the army outside was growing restless. Through the windows, Lyra could see torches gathering in the courtyard, could hear voices raised in angry chants demanding the Omega's death. "We need to end this quickly," Darius said through their mental connection. "Agreed. But Elena won't go down easily. Then we don't give her a choice." They struck together, their combined power creating a harmony of force that Elena couldn't counter. Darius's blade locked her dagger while Lyra reached out with her abilities, not to harm but to heal, specifically, to heal Elena of the magical modifications that had extended her life far beyond its natural span. Elena screamed as centuries of accumulated time crashed down on her all at once. Her hair went white as snow, her skin becoming papery and fragile, her enhanced speed and strength evaporating like morning mist. "What did you do to me?" she gasped, suddenly looking every one of her impossible years. "I gave you what you've been denying others for centuries," Lyra replied sadly. "A natural death, in your own time, without interference from unnatural power." Elena collapsed to her knees, her ancient body finally succumbing to the weight of her years. But her eyes still burned with hatred and fanatic certainty. "The army," she whispered with her dying breath. "They'll still kill you. Traditional values will prevail." She crumbled to dust, leaving only empty robes and the echo of centuries-old spite. "She's right about the army," Darius said grimly. "They're not going to simply disperse because Elena is gone. They believe they're here to save werewolf society." "Then we need to show them a better way," Lyra replied, moving to the library's tall windows. Outside, the courtyard was filled with warriors from dozens of traditional packs, all armed and ready for battle. Their faces showed the same fanatic certainty that had driven Elena. They truly believed that killing her would restore some mythical natural order. "I could address them," Darius suggested. "As their king, I could order them to stand down." "They wouldn't listen. They think you've been corrupted by Omega influence." Lyra studied the crowd, noting the mix of fear and hatred in their expressions. "But they might listen to me." "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. Everything about this situation is dangerous. But these people deserve to know the truth about what they're fighting for." She turned to face him, her golden-flecked eyes blazing with determination. "I won't hide anymore, Darius. I won't pretend to be less than what I am to make others comfortable." He searched her face, then nodded slowly. "Then we face them together. As equals? As partners." They made their way to the castle's main balcony, the one that overlooked the great courtyard where kings had addressed their people for centuries. The crowd fell silent as they appeared, hundreds of eyes fixed on the woman they'd come to kill. "I am Lyra Thorne," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled warriors despite their distance. "I am the Omega you came here to destroy." Angry shouts rose from the crowd, but she continued without flinching. "I am also the last descendant of the moonborn bloodline, the Omega family that once ruled alongside Alphas as equals. I carry in my blood the memory of a time when our society was built on partnership rather than oppression, when strength was measured not by the ability to dominate but by the wisdom to unite." "Lies," someone shouted. "Omega propaganda. The only lies are the ones you've been told about your own history," Lyra replied, her power giving her voice the resonance of absolute truth. "You were told that Omega Alpha bonds were unnatural aberrations. You were told that omegas were weak and needed alpha guidance. You were told that the current hierarchy was ordained by nature itself. She gestured, and her abilities allowed her to project images into the minds of everyone present, memories pulled from the ancient texts she'd studied, visions of the world as it had once been. The crowd gasped as they saw werewolf cities where omegas and alphas worked side by side, where blessed pairs ruled with wisdom and compassion, where strength came from unity rather than subjugation. This is what was destroyed during the purge, she continued. Not weakness, but a different kind of strength. Not chaos, but a more perfect order. And it was destroyed not because it failed, but because it threatened those who profited from inequality. Even if that's true, called out one of the pack leaders, look what you've become. You wield unnatural power, challenge ancient laws, upset the balance we've maintained for centuries. I challenge laws that were written by the victors to justify genocide, Lyra corrected. I wield power that is as natural as breathing, as ancient as the moon itself. And yes, I upset a balance that was built on the backs of the oppressed. She stepped forward, and her presence seemed to fill the courtyard despite the distance. But I'm not here to force you to accept me. I'm here to offer you a choice, the same choice that was denied to our ancestors. You can cling to the old lies, maintain systems that serve only a privileged few, and watch your society stagnate under the weight of its own contradictions. Or you can help us build something better. Better how? Another voice demanded. A kingdom where worth is measured by deeds, not birth rank. Where omegas are protected and valued, not hidden and oppressed. Where the bond between alpha and omega is celebrated as the source of strength it was always meant to be. Her eyes found Darius, and their love flowed between them like a visible force. A kingdom ruled not by one voice but by two, working in perfect harmony. The crowd stirred, uncertainty replacing hostility in many faces. She could sense the shift in their emotions, the way her words and the truth of her visions was challenging everything they'd been taught to believe. You want us to accept an Omega Queen, one of the pack leaders said slowly. I want you to accept an Omega Queen, Lyra corrected, emphasizing the title. Not a Luna who serves at her alpha's pleasure, but a co-ruler who stands as his equal. Not a figurehead who smiles and bears pups, but a leader who helps shape the future of our people. Impossible, someone muttered, but it lacked the conviction of earlier protests. The only things that are impossible are the things we choose not to attempt, Darius spoke for the first time, his voice carrying across the courtyard with royal authority. My mate has proven her worth not through bloodline or tradition, but through courage, wisdom, and sacrifice. She saved my life, exposed treachery that threatened our kingdom, and showed mercy to those who sought her death. He moved to stand beside Lyra, their hands linking in a gesture that symbolized their partnership. I offer you the chance to be part of something unprecedented, he continued. A kingdom that honors the old wisdom while embracing new possibilities. A society that protects all its members, regardless of rank. A future built on the foundation of true partnership between equals. And if we refuse, called out one of the more hostile pack leaders. Then you return to your territories with the knowledge that such a place exists, Lyra replied simply. You tell your people what you've seen and heard, and you let them decide for themselves whether they want to be part of the old world or the new one. No violence. No forced conversion. No force at all. Change that comes from violence isn't change, it's conquest. True transformation has to come from choice, from the recognition that something better is possible. The crowd fell silent as her words sank in. Lyra could feel the moment when hostility began transforming into curiosity, when the certainty of fanatic belief gave way to the possibility of hope. One by one, weapons were lowered. Not surrendered, but set aside as symbols of a conflict that no longer needed to be fought. The Omega Queen, someone called out, testing the title. What laws would she make? What changes would she bring? Equal representation for all ranks in government, Lyra replied without hesitation. Protection for Omegas who choose careers outside traditional roles. Recognition of same-rank bonds as valid marriages. Support for families regardless of their composition. Education for all pups, not just alphas, Darius added. Trade agreements that benefit entire communities, not just the wealthy. Justice systems that account for rank-based power imbalances. A voice for those who have been voiceless, Lyra concluded. A future where every werewolf can reach their full potential, regardless of what biology determined they should be. The transformation of the crowd was visible, audible, measurable in the way their sense shifted from hostility to hope. Not universal, some still looked skeptical, others frankly hostile, but enough to show that change was possible. I came here to kill a monster, one of the pack leaders said finally. Instead, I find myself listening to a visionary. The only monsters are the ones we create through cruelty and oppression, Lyra replied. Everything else is just different, and different isn't dangerous unless we make it so. Over the following days, as word spread throughout the werewolf world, Lyra found herself at the center of a revolution she'd never intended to start. Omega representatives began arriving from other kingdoms, seeking to learn about the new model of governance she and Darius were creating. Some came openly, with official blessing from their rulers. Others arrived in secret, smuggled across borders by underground networks that had existed for generations. All of them carried the same desperate hope, that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The Northern Territories want to send a delegation, Darius reported one evening as they reviewed the latest correspondence in their private study. Alpha Theron is apparently having second thoughts about his earlier hostility. Probably because 3 of his best advisors turned out to be Omegas in hiding, Lyra replied, signing a trade agreement with a pack that had agreed to recognize Omega rights in exchange for access to their healing knowledge. It's amazing how quickly attitudes change when people realize they've been wrong about someone they've worked with for years. The Southern Alliance is more resistant. They're threatening economic sanctions if we continue encouraging Omega rebellion. Let them. We're not encouraging rebellion, we're offering alternatives. If they choose to see freedom as rebellion, that says more about their system than ours. Darius set aside his papers and moved to where she sat, his arms encircling her from behind. Through their bond, she felt his contentment, his pride in what they'd accomplished, and underneath it all, his deep and abiding love. Any regrets? He asked softly. About which part? Accidentally crawling into your bed? Discovering I'm the heir to a bloodline that was supposedly extinct? Becoming co-ruler of a kingdom? Or completely upending the social order of an entire species? Any of it. All of it. She leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her cheek, the same heartbeat that had woken her that first night, though now she understood it had been racing not with sleep but with the recognition of his destined mate. No regrets, she said finally. Though I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't collapsed that night. If I'd never crawled into your bed. Someone else would have awakened your power eventually. The moonborn bloodline was too strong to stay hidden forever. But would it have been the same? Would we have found each other? Would we have changed things the way we have? I don't know, he admitted. But I do know that everything led us here, to this moment, to this choice. Maybe fate, maybe chance, maybe just the universe's sense of humor. Does it matter? She turned in his arms, studying the face that had become as familiar as her own. No, I suppose it doesn't. What matters is what we do with the time we have. Speaking of which, he said, scooping her up with supernatural ease, I believe it's time we retired for the evening. The Alpha King's orders, she teased as he carried her toward their bedroom. The Omega Queen's decision, he corrected. I'm just hoping she'll invite me to join her. Always, she replied, sealing the promise with a kiss. Their bedroom had been completely redesigned since that first accidental night together. The massive bed remained, but now it was surrounded by bookshelves filled with texts from both of their studies, maps showing the territories they governed together, and correspondence from the many kingdoms that were watching their experiment with fascination and fear. As they settled into bed together, both fully awake and fully equal partners in every sense of the word, Lyra couldn't help but laugh at the journey that had brought them here. What's so amusing? Darius asked, pulling her close. I was just thinking about that first night. How terrified I was, how certain I was going to die. How impossible everything that's happened since would have seemed. And now? Now I realize that sometimes the most impossible things are just the most necessary ones waiting for the right moment to become possible. Outside their windows, the castle settled into sleep around them. But their kingdom was far from quiet. In every territory under their rule, change was taking root. Omega servants were discovering they could be healers, teachers, even advisors. Alpha leaders were learning that strength shared was strength multiplied. And slowly, carefully, a new world was being born from the ashes of the old. Tomorrow we meet with the delegation from the eastern reaches, Darius murmured against her hair. They're interested in establishing Omega healing centers. And the day after that, we review the new educational proposals, Lyra added. Making sure all pups learn about the real history of our people, not just the version that supports existing power structures. The week after that, we have the wedding to attend, 2 alphas who want their bond recognized under our new laws. Then the trade summit, the judicial reform committee, the cultural exchange program. They fell silent, contemplating the future they were building together. It would be difficult, sometimes dangerous, always challenging. There would be setbacks, opposition, moments when the old ways seemed easier than forging new ones. But as Lyra drifted off to sleep in the arms of her mate and co-ruler, surrounded by the evidence of the revolution they'd sparked, she felt nothing but hope. She had crawled into the wrong bed one exhausted night and accidentally changed the world. Now she was going to spend the rest of her life making sure that change was worth it. The end. Thank you for listening to this story. Like, share and subscribe for more.